All right, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to week 2 of Global Social Movements. I have a quick little lecture just to give you some points of discussion, things to focus on in the readings as we start to get through the Black Panther Party. Hopefully, the documentary, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Black Panther Party, hopefully the documentary gives you a good sense of the history, the development, what it is the party was trying to do, and eventually kind of how the party dissolved in a way and moved into other areas of life, which I think is really important, right? Even though the Black Panther Party may not exist anymore, there is a legacy there. And I think the documentary does a really nice job of capturing that. So, just a couple of things that I want to focus on when we talk about the Black Panther Party. It was part of the second wave of the civil rights movement. This is a little bit at the same time that you see the US movement emerging, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This is the post, not post Martin Luther King. I mean, obviously he's still alive at this point. But it's sort of the second wave of groups that have formed up. And there's a very specific kind of ideology here, much more militant, obviously, much more involving Black nationalism. Clearly, something about armed struggle is never far from the center of the Black Panthers. It was initially formed as a self-defense movement, where in Oakland there were really, really high rates of police brutality, and the Black Panther Party, originally called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, essentially would follow the police around in Oakland, and when they made a traffic stop of a black individual, members of the Panther Party would pull over, they would get out of the car, excuse me, oftentimes carrying guns legally. They adhered to the letter of the law, but they would get out and they would make sure that the traffic stop was conducted without any police brutality or violence on the part of the police. Eventually, it did become a nationwide movement. You had chapters all across the country, notably in Chicago, where Fred Hampton became the party chairman. New Haven had an exceptionally active Black Panther Party chapter here in the city of New Haven. So it eventually spread from Oakland and became a nationwide movement. A couple of things to think about. In the Akabulian reading, Survival Pending Revolution, he's really talking about the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the Black Panther Party. And he says they were the heirs to Malcolm X, right? If we want to think, this may be a bit of an overgeneralization, but if you want to think of the civil rights movement as having like the Martin Luther King Jr. wing and the Malcolm X wing, right? One of them is a little bit more about Black nationalism. One of them is a little bit more militant. His argument is they are drawing on the legacy of Malcolm X more than anything else, right? So he has basically 4 things that he thinks underpins the philosophy of the Black Panther Party: the use of arms to achieve political aims, spiritual and mental rejuvenation, alliances with other ethnic groups, and the international struggle. And he thinks you can tie all of these back to Malcolm X's philosophy. So as you're reading through those 4 areas of sort of the philosophy of the Black Panther Party, I want you to think a little bit about how do you see those things reflected in the Panthers' 10-point program, right? That is their political program. Here is what they want to accomplish. So in that 10-point program, do you see examples of these 4 philosophical ideas? Also, how do these 4 ideas situate them within the context of the civil rights movement, right? In which ways are they like the Martin Luther King Jr. wing? In which ways are they unalike, right? So that, I think, is really important. And then also, how do these aims affect the cohesion and development of the movement, right? The movement says alliances with other ethnic groups are encouraged, right? As long as there's mutual respect between the groups. But as Akabulian points out, he's very incisive in this way, oftentimes the Panthers really struggled to create those alliances, or those alliances were very short-lived, and he gives specific reasons why. He kind of puts some of the blame on the Panthers themselves. But how do these help or hinder the development of the movement, the cohesion of the movement? One of the things you see in the documentary is that there's a lot of internal kind of turmoil that eventually kind of splits the group apart. So as you're reading through that, pay attention to those 4 philosophical underpinnings and think about how those are reflected in the political goals of the party, but also how those goals, put a bit of a strain on the group cohesion, the ability of the group to popularize itself, to spread its message, right? Akabulian, who himself was a former Panther, he has, I think, a very sobering analysis of this group, right? He looks at those four philosophical underpinnings and says, these are the things that define the Panthers, but these were also the things that led to some difficulties with the Panthers, right? So think about that as you're going through that reading. And the other one I want to really focus on, and this one also connects to the last reading, which really shows differences between like Black Panther Party members and members of the civil rights movement, the Martin Luther King wing, right? The Black Panther Party was originally, again, a West Coast movement, right? Oftentimes we think of the civil rights as like a southern or northeasterly thing. The Black Panther Party was West Coast. Again, it originated in Oakland. Oakland and LA were kind of the two places it really started. And it was a largely urban movement. It appealed to the working class or the marginally employed or the unemployed, whereas oftentimes the sort of more traditional civil rights movements applied to a more educated class, often a college educated class, solidly middle class. So some of the questions that I think she asks is like, why is this group the one that the Panther Party appeals to, right? Why the West Coast? Why is it more of an urban movement? That's really important, right? If we're thinking like, why did the movement start when it did and where it did, right? She wants to give us some answers to that. And she thinks looking at Oakland, looking at the West Coast, that explains it, right? There's a different set of grievances specific to Oakland. Are they shared in some way with the civil rights movement? Yes, certainly. But there are unique characteristics that the Black Panther Party is responding to, right? What problems is the Black Panther Party responding to that it feels maybe the traditional civil rights approach has failed to do? And again, does this appeal to a different type of member, right? Is a member of the Black Panther Party different than the Southern Leadership Coalition, right, or the Martin Luther King wing of the Black Panther Party? So what we're really getting at in this week's readings are, what's the underlying philosophy of the Black Panther Party? How did that contribute to the identity, contribute either positively or negatively, right, in terms of creating an identity or also breaking the identity apart? And then the question of, why Oakland? Why inner city? Why was this an inner city movement, right? Why was this a movement of the unemployed or the marginally employed? And because it was a movement of that group, is it responding to a very specific set of grievances, a very specific set of problems that they were facing? So getting at those origins, I think, is going to help us as we proceed through our discussion of the Black Panthers. So that's a quick kind of overview of this week. You've got an assignment for Monday and then another one for Thursday. This is just a quick overview of all the readings. Obviously, for Monday, you're focusing on Kabulian, and then Thursday, really the Donna Jean Murch book, which is a phenomenal book. I would encourage you to read the whole thing. I gave you the most prevalent chapter, the one that's most important for our purposes. But if you find her work interesting, the entire book, called Living for the City, is an absolutely amazing history of the Black Panthers. Al-Gabulian's book is really, really good too, but hers is just so meticulously researched and I think has a lot of really interesting things to say about the development of the Black Panthers. So that's all that I've got for this. Good luck. If you have questions, shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer them. And then I will really enjoy reading your responses, much like I enjoyed your responses for last week. So that's it. Okay, have a good one.